You're listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles.
Nice to see you again. We are in Daniel chapter 11 this morning. And if you've been with us, you remember we're catching Daniel in the middle of a pretty massive spiritual encounter. This is the meat of a 3-chapter long vision that he receives. And we're going to read it, but brace yourself. It's long, and there's a lot going on. So we'll read it, we'll talk about it, and we'll learn from it. If you want to follow along in the Red Pew Bible, it's on page 748 and 749 and 750. And also it'll be on the screen behind me. Here's Daniel chapter 11. Remember, this is an angel, the spiritual being speaking to Daniel. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north. And he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude, greater than the first. And after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. For plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. At the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. And he shall come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall. But these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy, and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, with none to help him. This is the word of the Lord. So Merry Christmas. One scholar talked about Daniel 11. He said, it's fit for the classroom, but of little use for sermons. So with that vote of confidence, let us begin. What you get in Daniel 11 is prophecy, but for us, it's history. There's a lot of history here. And one of the things about history that I've noticed about most people is you either love it or you hate it. You remember it fondly from high school, or you remember it not fondly. And one of the main differences between those who love it and those who hate it is imagination. Those who love history tend to engage their imagination when they hear it. Those who don't engage their imagination tend to not like history because it's a list of facts and events, thoughts, not even thoughts. You don't have many thoughts. You don't sort of connect yourself to the events or the facts. They're just a list of things. With an imagination, though, you put yourself in the story. You understand that this affects real people with real lives. You think about what it felt like, what it meant to exist in that time period. And if you have imagination and you love history, That's probably what you felt when I was just reading Daniel 11. If you can imagine, this is Daniel getting a forecast of hundreds of years of human history in which kingdoms are rising and falling. Intrigue is everywhere. Surprises in the geopolitical landscape are changing left and right, coming up around the corner in ways no one could anticipate. And as it happens, normal people, and God's own people especially, are caught in the crosshairs of things beyond their control. And so for them, it would feel like absolute chaos, like flying through a whirlwind, like you could never count on the next day coming. There are ways in which these people would feel caught up in a chaos they couldn't control. And in Daniel 11, what you get, so why tell Daniel all this? Well, the idea is that this can give them stability as they walk through these chaotic times. This can be a kind of stabilizer. When you look at airplanes, they have the big wings, which we tend to focus on. Then they have the little mini wings in the back. And you always wonder, why the mini wings? What's that for? Well, come to find out, they're called stabilizers. The idea is when turbulence hits, when crosswinds come, you need stabilizers to keep your vessel from going off course. And the stronger the winds, the stronger the stabilizers you need. And that's why planes are grounded in whirlwinds. They don't have the stabilizers they need to make it through that without coming apart. Well, Daniel's people were going to go through a whirlwind. And a lot of us right now are in the midst of a culture and a climate and a place and a world that feels like a whirlwind. It feels chaotic. And the question is, do we have the stabilizers to keep ourselves from falling apart? Do we have what we need to be stable in the whirlwind? A lot of people are noticing that in Los Angeles, the stabilizers we have aren't really up to the task. They're not strong enough for the winds we face. You hear about stress, about the need to adjust your lifestyle, to get rid of the chaos you feel. And what do people talk about? Well, you need to make time for morning meditation. You need to do breath work. Make sure you get some sun in your eyes. These sorts of things. Now look, at some level, there's nothing wrong with that. If your problem is too many emails, just to be really frank, like if your problem is, you have a lot of projects at work, or your problem is your inbox is overflowing, then yes, make some time for breath work, and it can calm you down. But the people I know in Los Angeles, the chaos they're facing is not typically too many emails. It's someone died recently. It's a job got lost. It's physical health changed on a dime. It's the idea that they moved somewhere, LA is full of people from across the country, and they left behind their entire support system, and now they feel very lonely, entirely alone, in a city that's not built to help them. There's a million different ways that people feel like they can't go on. And in light of that, making time for morning meditation doesn't really seem to fit the bill of the stabilizer you need. And believe it or not, that massive passage we just read gives you stabilizers for life in the chaos. It gives you stabilizers strong enough for the winds that you face now, strong enough for the winds that can come, strong enough for them, strong enough for you. So how do we find them and how do we put them to work in our life? Well, we have to talk about the passage and know what it's talking about, and then we have to see how it stabilizes us. So there's your outline. Let's talk about the passage and see how it stabilizes us. So first, let's talk about the passage. If you look at verses 1 through 4, and I won't go through every verse in detail, you have Darius, the king of Persia. He's name-checked because he's the one who gave the decree to send the Israelites back to Jerusalem to rebuild their city, the end of the exile that we've learned about in the book of Daniel. And after Darius come 3 more kings. This is where the prophecy begins. Eventually you get Xerxes I, incredibly rich and powerful. He spent 4 years getting military power to attack Greece. And Greece never forgot, which is why when Alexander the Great came to power, they annexed Persia almost immediately. And Alexander the Great, conquering the known world, dies at 32. His sons are all murdered, so his kingdom does not go to his posterity, like it says here. And his 4 generals end up taking 4/4 of his kingdom. And from there, the rest of the prophecy focuses in on 2 of those generals that become 2 kingdoms. The kingdom in the north, which is the Syria and what was formerly Babylon, that was known as the Seleucid dynasty in the history books, and the kingdom of the south, which is Egypt, and that dynasty was the Ptolemies. Now, You get from there this back and forth of dynastic intrigue and war games and political annexation, all with Jerusalem, the glorious land, squarely in the middle, out of control of their own destiny and being thrown around by whatever happens in the north and the south. Whoever is annexed whoever's fighting whom, that's what's going to affect them and their lives. Chaos, out of control. But what's fascinating about the first 20 verses is how staggeringly accurate the prophecy is. If you own something like an ESV study Bible, you can see in the notes exactly how everything lines up. Or honestly, just grab a history book and open to this section of history and read Daniel 11. You can find the connections. But let me give you just one example so we don't have to go through the whole thing. In verses 5 through 7, the king of the south shall be strong. One of his princes will be stronger than he. Here's what happened. The king of the south is Ptolemy the first. The king of the north is this man named Seleucus, who became the founder of the Seleucid dynasty. But for a while, Seleucus was exiled by one of his own generals and ended up living in Egypt and serving under Ptolemy as one of his princes. And when that general was out of the way, he was able to go back up, reclaim power as the king of the north, and annexed a lot of territory, became far more powerful than Ptolemy was. And they jockey for power in the region for years, and then in verse 6, you see the next generation take the throne, and they try and make an alliance. And they do so by marriage. So Ptolemy II sends his daughter, her name was Berenice, up to marry the prince of Syria, and that will keep them aligned. The problem was, as is often the case, the prince of Syria was already married, and his first wife didn't look kindly on this and her heirs being disinherited, and so she poisoned her husband and Berenice in such a way that she did not retain her strength, nor did he. In the same year, the one who sort of sponsored her, Ptolemy II, her father, died. And then in verse 7, you find him succeeded by a branch from Berenice's roots, which was her brother, who then invades the Seleucid kingdom and prevails by conquering its capital city. And we can go on through the rest of the chapter and show you the staggering accuracy of these prophecies. The power struggle between north and south, seesawing back and forth, with Jerusalem right in the middle. And in verse 21, things change. And we begin to focus on this one figure at length, this contemptible person who flatters his way into ruling the northern kingdom, makes and breaks alliances as he grows in power. He attacks the southern kingdom, enjoys a lot of victory, and then heads back to his own land. And on the way, he goes through Jerusalem, the glorious land, and he finds a rebellion underway and just suppresses it brutally. That's in verse 28. He later makes another campaign against the south, but this time they have ships from Kittim. Kittim is Rome. So now Rome is a world player. And basically the Romans tell this king of the north to pound sand and go home. And he's utterly humiliated. And the way home is through Jerusalem. And he decides to vent his anger there. The temple's profaned, the sacrifices are forbidden, an abomination is set up in the temple. Those who refuse to follow along are killed. Now this is clearly Antiochus Epiphanes. We saw him back in chapter 8, that little horn. And we read about him in the history books, setting up an altar to Zeus in the temple, assassinating the high priest, sacrificing an unclean animal on the altar in the temple, and essentially massacring anyone who tried to stay faithful to the God of the Bible. It's hard to describe the terror of that time in Jerusalem. And then, around verse 36, the language starts to change. You get this sort of more amorphous king, and things get larger. The descriptions get more climactic. And while some of it could fit with Antiochus, a lot of it doesn't line up very well. Now, this is actually kind of common in Old Testament prophecy. Events that are connected to each other, but further away in history, can be presented as right next to each other in prophecy. The classic example is of a mountain range. When you look off at a mountain range, you can see sort of a lower mountain and a higher mountain, the peak. And so you go, and as you get closer, you climb that lower mountain, and you stand on top of it, and you realize that peak is much further out than you realized. There's a whole valley in between. And in many ways, that's what you see in a lot of Old Testament prophecy, and it seems like what's happening here. It seems like this is a prophecy about Antiochus that phases into a prophecy about a similar figure at the end of history, who will gain power and bring a lot of suffering, but nevertheless will come to his end with none to help him. There's the passage. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Pastor, for telling me about the King of the North and the King of the South. My heart is strangely warmed. But look, this is given to Daniel to help him. It's not given to him as a future history lesson. It's given to him, to stabilize his people. While the world seems like it's falling apart, troops are trampling through Jerusalem back and forth. Whose troops? Who knows? And as that happens, it's supposed to give them stability. It can give them stability in the chaos. It can give you stability in the chaos. And what are the stabilizers? Well, the back of a plane, you get three. You get the two on the sides and the one on the top. Go with it. And I'm going to give you three right now from Daniel chapter 11. You get three stabilizers: wisdom, hope, and the knowledge of God. Wisdom, hope, and the knowledge of God. The first part of the passage, you see a lot of kings rising and falling. And believe it or not, this gives you wisdom. You read through it, right? And you see the king of the north has the upper hand. Oh, but here comes the king of the south. King of the south does this weird alliance trick and then works with his allies to kind of scheme, and he gets into power. Oh, here comes the king of the south again. It's back and forth over and over again. These same kingdoms rising and falling. And what you have here are very intelligent, very powerful, very clever people anticipating, making all the right moves. These are the world changers. These are the 30 under 30. There are all these people. And after a while, it just doesn't matter. No matter how well they moved around, they're washed away in the tides of history. Remember Daniel's major theme, one of the major themes, which is that every kingdom falls except for one, and that's God's kingdom. Every kingdom ends except for one. And that's what Daniel 11 is emphasizing. These kingdoms seem so powerful, and they end up falling eventually, only to be replaced by another kingdom where everyone says, oh, this is the powerful kingdom, and then that one falls and is replaced eventually as well. Shelley, famous English poet, he wrote, his famous poem is Ozymandias. He went to a museum. He saw this sort of decrepit old bust of a former pharaoh. And I won't read you the whole thing. It's actually not that long. But the poem is about a man who essentially sees this pharaoh, but in a broken statue in the middle of a desert. And there's a little podium, a little caption underneath the broken statue, which essentially is nothing but legs. And it says, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." But the statue's broken, and all around is nothing but sand. The Bible says that what you can't do is put your hope in kingdoms that fail. What you can't do is put your hope in things that are going to vanish one day. Ozymandias looked incredibly powerful during his time, but eventually it's just sand. And if you put your hope in things that look incredibly powerful, eventually they'll be just sand too. Here's one way the Bible puts it. Psalm 146 says, "Put not your hope in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day, his plans perish." It's always a temptation to put your hope in princes, to put your hope in what seems powerful in the moment, and to find your stability there. And yet, those things are destructible, which means you'll always forever be unstable. You're always as unstable as the thing you put your hope in, you put your life in. When one woman read The Lord of the Rings, and she wrote to Tolkien at the end, and she was flabbergasted. She said, how in the world could Sauron, this arch enemy, this incredibly intelligent, evil, malevolent being, this incredibly powerful intellect, how could this being put all of his power in this one little ring that was subject to destruction? Just a bad plot point. What are you writing about? And he wrote her back, and he said, essentially, that's because that's what people always do. So that they always build their lives on something that can be destroyed, and then they fall apart. They put their hope in princes. Most people in Los Angeles are focused on getting the right friends and getting into the right social circles and making the right career choices and living the right lifestyle and having the right opinions, being on the right side of things, so focused on whatever is in vogue now with no sense about how all those things change on a dime. If you want just an example, I'm going to prove it to you. I'm sorry if you're in high school, but remember when you were in high school? Remember how you dressed? Remember what you thought? And you look back and now and you say, how could I? I'm sorry if you're in your 20s, but if you're like me in your 40s, you look back in your 20s and you say, what was I doing? Remember how you dressed? Remember what you thought? Whatever age you are, you always feel like you've just arrived. You've just finally found wisdom. I don't know what you were doing before, but now I finally found it. And yet, what are you going to say about yourself in 10 years, in 20 years? And we as a society, we always think we've just arrived. We've finally gotten past all that old stuff, all that backward stuff. What are they going to say about us in 20 years, 30 years, 100 years, 200 years? You see, we put our stock in princes that come and go, that ebb and flow. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. Christianity gives you the wisdom to put every circumstance not in conversation with the last 10 years, the last 20 years, but in conversation with eternity. What Christianity does, you ever seen a time-lapse video before? You see someone with a rock and water, erosion, and you look at this rock and you go, that's a strong rock, and the water kind of comes in and out. It's very nice. The water seems not very powerful. The rock seems very strong and sturdy. Then you time-lapse it, one picture a day, and you watch the rock slowly shrink under the power of the water coming in and out. In the exact same way, Christians have the wisdom to time-lapse everything in their life. They look around the city, they look around the world, and they time-lapse it. You have that in your toolkit to say, what does this look like when I time-lapse it? And you begin to see the powerful thing that seems so important, the inner circle, the achievement, the opinion, the culture, slowly begins to fade over time and become Ozymandias. And when you have that kind of wisdom, you have far more stability. You know what else you have with that kind of wisdom? It's a gateway drug to God. If you're here and you're not a Christian and you start time-lapsing things around you, it's a gateway drug because one day you're going to look around and go, the only thing I can actually count on, the only thing that won't change is a God who's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the only place I really find that is in Jesus Christ. It's a gateway drug. But Christianity gives you the wisdom to say, however strong the current regime feels, however strong the chaos feels, and the person in whose hands you feel like you're held sometimes, no matter how strong it is, they're Ozymandias. You can see through. And you can ground yourself in stability on a God who never changes. Now, do you have that in your life? If you don't have that in your life, you will never really feel stable. You'll always sense the fragility of the prince you put your hope in. But if you have this wisdom and you put it to work in your life, you can find yourself being stable, building a life on God. You get wisdom that stabilizes you. You also get hope that stabilizes you. Now, here's the problem. Just because you know that the powers around you don't last doesn't mean they can't hurt you. And that's what you see in the passage. I mean, we shouldn't laugh because it was very, very severe for the people who lived through this time period. But what happens, in their life is true to some degree of all lives. Suffering is inevitable. You never escape suffering. And yet, there's a hope you can get from this passage that stabilizes you even through very difficult suffering. And I want to show you how. When Antiochus comes onto the scene in the middle of the chapter, one of the things you see is God being at work. Throughout the first part, it's true. Throughout the middle part, it's true. Throughout the end part, it's true. And you see it in many ways that are easy to overlook. But for example, you look at verse 27. 2 kings are conspiring together, but it will be to no avail. Why not? For the end is yet to be at the time appointed. Appointed by whom? Well, by God. In verse 29, one of the kings says, it's at the time appointed he shall return. Appointed by whom? If you were here a few weeks ago, you remember, these are called divine passives. The idea is that God is doing these things, but it's a passive phrasing, so it's not putting it right in front of your face. Who's making this happen? God. And the lesson then is that when these sorts of things are happening, you might not see God at work in them yourself, but you can trust that everything is by his divine appointment. It's his appointed time at which things happen, no earlier and no later. Nothing surprises God. He's the architect of the whole vision. And by the end of the passage, what do you find? Well, at this end time situation, this end times figure will come to his end, and there'll be none to help him. In other words, the suffering brought about in the scope of human history has an expiration date, past which God will wipe it clean from the face of his creation. So one of the first lessons you learn that gives you hope is this idea that God is at work even when you can't see him. And that work culminates in one day suffering being wiped clean from God's creation. But there's more than that, because even in the midst of the suffering, you find God at work to do you good in your own heart and soul. You look at verse 36, and it says, the wise stumble. Some of the wise will stumble. Stumble earlier, you find, is through persecution, through the sword. They'll suffer. They suffer in their stumbling, but what's it going to do? It's going to refine them. It's going to purify them. It's going to make them white. If you want gold to be as beautiful as gold can be, you have to put it under heat. You have to get all that's not gold out of it. The only way to do it is to purify it, to heat it up at high temperature. And once you heat it up, you can wipe that dross away, and what you have left is gold as pure and beautiful as gold is created to be. How do you make a human beautiful? One of the ways is by putting heat on them and watching the impurities go away, refining them. And so, even when you can't see how, God is at work in your difficult circumstances, even using them to refine you, until one day, all suffering is behind you, is in the rearview mirror. Now, if that's true, that can stabilize you. For whatever you go, do you see how that can stabilize you? If you know that's true, that can stabilize you. And some of you might be saying, how in the world could that be true? Look at the world. Look at the chaos. Look at the whirlwind. How can that possibly be true that God is at work? Well, I talk a decent amount about how many young children have gone through my home. Some just are still there. They're around still. I've had a lot of 4-year-olds at this point. And I'll tell you one thing about a 4-year-old, they're incredibly unstable. They're always either overreacting or underreacting. And you know why? They have no context. And it's not their fault. When a 4-year-old wants to go touch the stove, and you say you can't touch the stove, they look at you like you took something beautiful away from them. Look at how bright and shiny it is. Why would you withhold this joy from me? And at some point, you don't blame them for that. You go, well, the point, I'm the parent. I know the context. I have the perspective that you lack. So I'm going to pull you away. You're going to think this is suffering, but I'm pulling you away from something that's actually for your good. I'm actually making this better for you. And in that same way, if there's a God that works in history at this kind of macro level, like architecting all of creation and all of human history, then at some level, don't you see, we must be more like the 4-year-old than we realize. We must lack the context, the perspective that we need to fully understand our circumstances. And therefore, we must lack some of the perspective, some of the context we need to evaluate those circumstances. In that way, God knows, God is at work, God is doing things for our good because he has that perspective. Now, a lot of people in our city are living just completely apart from it, completely on their own, living like 4-year-olds. I'm not trying to be condescending. I'm just saying, as human beings, the best, the brightest of us, if God is working at that macro level, mustn't we be like that? Mustn't we be like 4-year-olds that need someone's hand to hold, that need someone's perspective? If you're going through life, if you're going through the city, and you are living completely on your own, with no guidance, no one to trust, no one bigger than you to lend you perspective, to lend you context, to trust when things don't make sense, you're going to be at least as unstable as a 4-year-old. You're going to flit around from emotion to emotion. You're going to fall apart at certain things in ways that don't make sense to you. You're going to be an unstable person in an unstable life. Of course suffering is going to overthrow you. Of course you're going to be unstable. Oh, but if you actually have a parent who loves you, if you have a parent who loves you, who you trust, then you can be stabilized in uncertain times, even when things are frightening and dark. Christians, this is what Christianity gives you. This is what Daniel 11 gives you. You have a hand to hold in the dark. When things are full of chaos and full of conflict, Christianity doesn't come along and say, oh, here's exactly why. I'll flowchart it for you. Christianity gives you a handle. It gives you something better. It gives you what you need as a 4-year-old. 4-year-olds don't respond well to flowcharts. They can't grasp what you're going for. And so what do you have to do? You have to bring them in hand. You have to say, I love you, trust me. This is for your good, I promise. And ideally, as a parent, you're living a good enough life with a good enough track record to show them that you are a trustworthy person. Christians pray, Our Father in heaven. And that means Christians can bring every circumstance, even the difficult ones, into conversation with their Father in heaven. that means then it's not just suffering all the way down. See, our Father in heaven gives us hope. It's not just suffering all the way down. The chaos doesn't win. It's not meaningless. Even in the midst of the suffering, he has good purposes for you. And so when you pray, our Father in heaven, in the midst of the suffering, there's still plenty of tears. Oh, but there's also hope. There's hope because you're holding the hand of someone who can see more than you can see and who can finally deal with suffering in the end. You see, it stabilizes you. What are you going through right now? Do you have that stability? You can. Not because he's going to give you all the answers, but because he's going to give you his hand. You pray our Father in heaven, and he'll walk with you, and you can trust and hope and be stable in a chaotic world. Okay, wisdom, hope, last. The knowledge of God. In the very middle of the passage, in the thick of it, you find verse 32, and it says, "The people who know their God will stand firm." Now, standing firm means essentially staying faithful, even when it's hard. Faithfulness in the difficult times. There is incredible pressure here in the passage on these people. And standing firm means you don't compromise under that pressure. When the whirlwind comes, you stay standing in the same place. You stand firm. There are certain kinds of people who can stand firm in the whirlwind. They can stay faithful. They don't compromise. So what makes you someone like that? Well, verse 32 tells you, the knowledge of God. The people who know their God will stand firm. How does that work? Well, at least a couple of levels. One is sort of the baseline, the superficial level, and that's this. If you know God, the only rational thing to do is to stay faithful. At some level, just baseline knowledge of the existence of God, the one who is eternal and nothing else is, the one to whom we all must give an account, the only logical thing to do in any circumstance is to obey, to be faithful to that God and not other powers that will one day disappear. It's the only rational move. In other words, what does it gain a person if they get the whole world but sin against the only one who counts most? It's the only logical thing. That's the superficial level, though. And let me give you the deeper level. The word know, like to know God in the Bible, is rarely superficial. It's rarely about information transfer. In other words, it's rarely about a Wikipedia page that you can read and rattle off facts. It's not knowing about. The word know in Scripture is almost always personal, relational knowledge. There's an intimacy, an acquaintanceship implied in the word know. And typically, let me start that again. If that's true, then knowing God and the way it leads to standing firm is through a personal knowledge of God. It's through getting a deeper personal knowledge of him that will lead to you being able to stand firm in the chaos. Now, this is different than almost anything else. Most of the time, typically, the closer you get to another person, the more you see how they can let you down. You know, you go on Yelp, and you want to find a restaurant. There's little boxes you can check. You know, I want it to be hip, or I want it to be new. You know, I want it to be this kind of food. There's a box called romantic, or like date night. You click that one, and you know what you find? I learned what they mean is just places you can't see. So, like, if you go in there, you can't read the menu, you can't see any people, you can't see a thing. Because that's what romantic means. It means candlelight. It means dim lights. Because what these people in these restaurants have figured out is that you are more attractive if people can't see you that well. That's what they've learned. In dim lighting, you can hide the flaws. But then the fluorescents get turned on. Wait, the closer you get to someone, the less you can only spend time with them in dim lighting, and the more they're going to see your strengths and your weaknesses. They're going to see your strengths and your flaws. What makes you beautiful, what makes you flawed. The brighter the lights get turned up, the more they see all of you. The closer you get to someone, the more you see their strengths and their flaws. The same thing is true of someone's character. The closer you get to someone in relationship, the more you see their strengths of character, and the more you see the weaknesses of character that might hurt you. That is why love between human beings is always beautiful and always risky. The closer you get, the more you see both. The only exception to that rule is with God. Because when you come to God and you turn the lights up, you just get more God. It's the only situation, in all of creation. Well, he's not in creation, but in all of, there's nothing in creation that compares to this. where you're able to look to God and turn the lights all the way up, and the more you see of God, the more goodness you get, the more majesty you get, the more glory you get. Turn the lights up as high as you want. Get to know him even better. The more you acquaint yourself with who God is as a person, the more you see his justice and goodness and beauty and kindness and mercy and sovereignty, his intelligence and joy. You see all the things about God, and you never find a flaw that makes you worry one day he might hurt me. Now understand, we're in church. We all know that God is good. But secretly, every single one of us is scared at some deep level that we don't trot out in church, that one day we might find a part of God that says he doesn't like us, and he's going to throw us to the side. That one day the lights will get turned up bright enough, we'll see what he really thinks. We'll see that he really will vanish on us one day when it matters most. And here comes Daniel. It's those who know their God who stand firm. Why do you not stand firm? Why do you move? Why do we compromise? Why do we move around? Why do we disobey? At some level, isn't it because you think at some baseline level that this thing you're disobeying will give you more than God can give you? At some level, you think that you need to supplement, that you need to hedge your bets. You need to make sure that if God lets you down, you have something else. It's always the way. The only way to stand firm, to stay faithful, is to know a God who's never like that. What does Scripture say? In your light, I see light. One thing I ask and I would seek, to see your beauty. This gives, if you understand that you can look at God for eternity, for centuries and centuries, you can get closer to him and acquaint yourself more with him, and you will never find something that will threaten you to let you down. You will never find a flaw. You'll only find more beauty, more glory, more weight, more gravity, more goodness. If you understand that, it will give you tremendous stability in the life you live here in the chaos. One writer was talking about friendship. She talked about loyalty. She said, loyalty is the rarest quality. Its value is incredibly high. It's saying everything shifts and nothing is forever, but I am, and you can count on me. And I read that and I thought to myself, boy, I never want to be her friend. She seems perfectly nice. But at some point, if that's what you think loyalty is, you will fix your hope for loyalty on someone and you will chew them up and spit them out. Because who among us can say, I am forever, and you can count on me? Even the best of us end up in a graveyard. The best of us. Who can say that? Only God, with this beauty, this majesty, this glory, can ever give you that kind of loyalty, that kind of faithfulness. And only when you know him, do you know him? Only when you know him will you find yourself exhibiting faithfulness in your own life, standing firm. That's what gives you an anchor in the storm. That's what stabilizes you. And look, where do you see it the most clearly? The Christian tradition unanimously says, do you want to know God? Look at the cross. Do you want to know what he's like? Look at the cross. The wounds, the blood, the payment for what we owe, the giving of his own perfect obedience to us who don't deserve it. That's you seeing what God is really like with the lights on. That's you seeing it up close with the fluorescence. You look to the cross, and when you see that, when you see who he is, and you acquaint yourself with him, you find yourself able to stand firm because you know your God. You see what's happening. People walk by the cross, and what do they say? Why, if you're the king, why, if you're the Son of God in the flesh, are you staying up there? Why not just come down? You've done miracles for others, do one for yourself. And the New Testament treats that as all irony. Because the truth is, he could have come down. It would have been nothing at all. But why does he stay? He stays so that he can take your sin and pay for it, and so that when the Father looks at you, he can see the same sonship, the same righteousness as he sees in his own natural Son, Jesus Christ. He stays because he loves. If he didn't get off then, he's not getting off now, do you see? If he didn't come off the cross then, he's not going to sacrifice you now. Look to the cross. Get to know your God. Get to know the loyalty and the faithfulness of God in Jesus Christ, and you will find yourself standing firm. Know God and stand firm. And let's close with this. Some of you, some people in LA, and I think some people here, you're killing yourself trying to be good. You're killing yourself trying to get away from sin, trying to not fall into some moral fit. You're killing yourself trying to obey, trying to be the right kind of person. You're killing yourself. And what you've done is look at your own life and think, I'm not there yet, and that's why you're killing yourself. I just need to drive myself forward more. I need to adjust my lifestyle more. I need to try these different habits. I need to find these new ways. And fair enough, habits are good. But here comes Daniel 11, this really long chapter, and it says, have you looked up? Have you gotten to know God in Jesus Christ? Have you acquainted yourself, know God, and step forward in faithfulness? And then some of you, maybe it's the same people, you feel like you're not killing yourself, you feel like you're being killed. Circumstances have changed. Things have come into your life that are extraordinarily difficult. And it feels like the powers beyond your control are throwing you around like you're in the whirlwind. Look to the cross, know your God. See where the real whirlwind really touched down on not just anyone, but God in the flesh. And then find yourself remembering that out of that, he brought joy and forgiveness and eternal life for you and one day a recreated world. Know God, stand firm. The more you know him, the more you'll see he will carry you through and he will not give up. Let's pray. Lord, bless us. Help us to see these things. Give us these stabilizers that we might, in our own lives, enjoy fully the stability purchased for us on the cross and look forward in wisdom and hope and a relationship with you to the life you have in store for us ahead. We give you our praise now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles. For more information, please visit us on the web at cornerstonewla.org.